Hello, this is Zach with musclesandveggies.com. Wanted to come at you guys with a short video tonight. And this video is going to go over a couple different principles on light exposure. Okay, light exposure. So we're going to talk about cortisol and we're going to talk about melatonin. Now, cortisol and melatonin are inverse. Okay, so in the morning we have this cortisol spike, and through the day it plummets. Okay, cortisol gets us up out of bed, gets us moving, and then as the day it starts dropping, and about 3, 4, 5 o'clock at night, this switch happens where cortisol gets below and melatonin starts rising. So the closer we get to bed, melatonin is getting us ready for deep sleep. It's getting us ready for our REM cycles. It's getting us ready for the night ahead of recovery and rest. So if this balance is off, if we had too much cortisol and not enough melatonin, you're not going to get proper rest. Okay. And cortisol has some negative effects along with it too. Not that it's all bad, but it eats our muscle tissue. And while it eats our muscle tissue, it raises our insulin, which allows us and makes us store fat around the middle. So we get skinny fat with too much cortisol, okay? So you'll get muscle loss, sarcopenia, and you also get a nice ring of abdominal fat as well. So what we're gonna look at is two different studies. Now, the first one, we're gonna answer the question, does light at night, so house lighting or artificial lighting or our computers, tablets, phones, does that hurt our melatonin production, which therefore gives us too much cortisol in the morning and also gives us too much stress, which is part of cortisol as well. So the first thing we're going to do is look at a study that is on just that. So I'm going to pull this up here very quick like. Now, this study actually is, they took 116 volunteers between the ages of 18 and 30 years old. These were healthy volunteers. Now, they tested the hypothesis that exposure to room light in the late evening suppresses the onset of melatonin synthesis and shortens the duration of melatonin production. Now, here's what they did. So they exposed them to room light or dim light in the 8 hours preceding bedtime. What they did is they measured melatonin. They took it while they were sleeping and also before leading up to sleep. Now, the results right here. So compared with dim light, exposure to room light before bedtime suppressed melatonin, resulting in a later melatonin onset in 99% of individuals. Okay, so this wasn't just like 8 out of 10. We're talking about 116 people, and 99% of them, it shortened their melatonin. Now, it actually delayed it by about 90 minutes is what it said. Now, it also says while they were sleeping, it says exposure to room light during the usual hours of sleep suppressed melatonin by greater than 50%, okay, in most trials. So about 85% of the trials. That means that not only did they have less melatonin while they were sleeping, but they also had, or I mean, leading up to sleep, but also while they were actually sleeping, if they left them under that light, their melatonin never rose high enough to get them into that deep sleep, that recovery that we want. Okay, so we know the answer to that question. Light does hurt our sleep at night. So we want to limit our house lighting. You see behind me? We use dim lights in the house, okay? Blue light blocking glasses do help, like the Swannies, okay? Also, putting a blue light filter on your phone or your tablet or F-Lux for your computer. There's a lot of different tricks you can do with that. But the point is we want to give ourselves the most recovery and the best sleep so we can feel the best and lower our cortisol in the morning, all right? So let's talk about cortisol. Now, does daylight improve our sleep or stress? So if we get light at the right time during the day, does it improve our sleep or stress? So that's what we're going to look at next here. Let me pull this study up super fast. And here we go. So in this study, okay, they took They took individuals. This is of 20 healthy men and women were used during this study. Subjects were studied in an environment free of time cues for 9 to 10 days. Subject received a 6 to 7 hour exposure of bright light, okay, that simulated the sun, and then 3 lux light or dim light simulated for after sunset, okay? And what they did here is they took these individuals and they tried to mimic the natural light that we have on the earth and see how it affected them. Now, here's what the conclusion was. During the biological night and morning, the bright light exposure significantly reduced plasma cortisol levels at both circadian phases studied, whereas dim light exposure had little effect on cortisol levels. The finding of an acute suppressive effect on bright light exposure on cortisol levels supports the existence of a mechanism by which information can be acutely influence the human adrenal glands. So that means light exposure actually has an influence on our adrenal glands. So what does that mean actually? So let's break this down. This means that if we get early morning sunlight or daylight through the day, okay, we lower our cortisol levels, which allows us to be less stressed, more recovered, and save our muscle mass, but also it allows our melatonin to get higher at night, okay? So we recover better, we sleep better, we're less stressed, we have less cortisol the next day, we burn more fat, we just feel better, okay? So the moral of this whole story here is that early morning sunlight and daylight, which everybody's experienced, a long day on the lake or a long day on the beach, you're ready for bed that night, okay? You sleep really, really good. So why is that? That's from that lower of cortisol that we get from this bright light exposure. Now, at night, what we don't want to do is sit in front of a bunch of TVs, tablets, computers, and super bright house lighting, because that is going to actually hurt our melatonin production. So you can see how that study concluded that the adrenal glands stimulated by the pituitary gland, stimulated by the hypothalamus, all works together in this process to interpret light through our eyes, okay, and tell our body what's going on based on that light. 1,000 years ago, we didn't have a bunch of artificial light. We just had the sun and we just had fire. And that basically told, through our eyes, told our brain what was happening in our environment, that we needed to either get ready for the day or get ready for sleep. Okay, so that is your tip for the day, is learn how to optimize your light exposure, expose yourself to lighting during the day, and guard yourself from lighting at night. Any questions, comments, put them below. Also, if you learned something from this video, like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel for more. This is Zach with musclesandveggies.com. Thanks.